Okay, so today we are continuing to work on this iPhone 6 Plus, and so we're going to go over a couple things. This iPhone 6 Plus has the typical issue you might remember from when these were new, bend gate. So as you can see here, we've got a slight bend in this side of the frame, and we're going to straighten that out before we apply the new screen, just so in the future we don't have the same issue. But first, we're going to swap the components from our old screen here to new screen. So this is an older model iPhone, the 6, but it's still going to be the most commonly repaired iPhone model out there. Just because of how many of these they made. 225 million iPhone 6 series were produced, and there's still a ton of them out there. So right now, I'm just going to remove the Touch ID bracket and then the connector. This is also the most sensitive part of a screen replacement on iPhone 6, just because these connectors over time get brittle, and it's very easy for these just to come apart, and then you won't have a fingerprint scanner anymore. So how I do it is you do not use metal for this either, but you can use your fingernail or a plastic spudger to get in there, unseat that connector. And how I do it, and this will vary from person to person, but I pop out this gasket first, and then I slowly work that off. And that's our Touch ID sensor. Okay, next step is going to be these 6 screws on the side here. These are also the most commonly stripped screws when attempting a screen repair. If these start stripping, do not panic or try harder. A good tip, and I can't really demo this here because of the curve in my desk, but if you set it against a table, a flat edge surface, then you'll get more leverage and you can go directly down and unscrew strip screws. Okay, so we're gonna get 3 on the other side. Then there are 4 screws on the proximity sensor retaining bracket.
So we're also going to transfer the proximity sensor?
Correct. Okay, so this cable, if you've never dealt with one of these before, it kind of folds in an interesting way. So the ear speaker goes underneath, makes contact with these copper points, and if that is not aligned properly, your ear speaker will not function. This is the second most common area where these screen replacements go badly. Removing the proximity sensor from the bracket in the screen. For whatever reason, with time and age, sometimes these proximity sensors stick in the little plastic bracket, and they will stay in the screen when you move the sensor. So you want to just apply leverage coming from this side, slowly, and what you want to see is the sensor still on this flex and not sitting in there. Another kind of difficult area is this microphone for the Siri microphone functionality. There's some adhesive holding this on.
Probably helps to have nails, huh?
Yeah, that's how I do it. Ross, you would use a plastic tool. Yeah. Okay. So you unstick that. That's our proximity sensor. Okay, so now we can remove this back plate. This is gonna house the main flex cable. This connects your home button from the bottom here to the main board of the phone. There's also some adhesive down here. You can come underneath of the tweezers. And you want to get this metal plate on the back there with that, otherwise it won't sit properly in your new screen. Okay, and then that is it for disassembly.
Okay.
And it is
Now we're installing the back plate.
Correct.
the
You'd start
right
you'd
sensor.
start with the back plate, just because of the proximity sensor bracket screws would go on top of these. And you don't need to over tighten these screws. Just until they stop turning, you don't need to really give them any extra torque. Okay. We're going to install our Touch ID sensor. And you want to try to center the alignment with these two holes right there, just so there's not any excess strain on this flex cable right there. Plug it in. And depending on which, this is an OEM screen, so we won't have to worry too much about this, but on some aftermarket screens, the glass is actually going to be a different thickness. So if your home button does not feel right after your repair, it is possible to bend this bracket very slightly to kind of adjust the depth of the home button, how it sits in your new screen.
This is one of the last mechanical home buttons, huh?
Yes, besides 6S.
Mm-hmm.
If your home button stops clicking, but you still have your Touch ID functionality, it is actually possible to rebuild the clicking mechanism in the actual home button, but that's no way to go. Okay, so we're going to install our proximity sensor.
That seems a little
And-
trickier, right?
Yeah, just the alignment, getting it's an annoying problem to have to deal with once you get it all back together and your camera's blurry or something like that. So what you do is you start with the Siri microphone.
Okay.
You align that with this there.
Come on the side here.
And since this is a reused OEM screen, it's not going to have the same sticky adhesive, so. Okay, and then your speaker's going to sit there. And then these two holes are going to line up with the extended parts of the your speaker. This bracket sits on top. Make sure it all sits correctly, and you can see that the your speaker contacts are aligned. Once again, this is it's a phone. You don't need too excessive torque on these screws, and that can also, when you're reinstalling this plate on the logic board, it leads to things like long screw damage. So you don't need that much torque on these screws. So that is actually it for installing these small parts on the new screen, and then the only thing remaining would be to connect the flex connectors. I guess another thing we can talk about is the way these cables are routed. That's another common issue. So the proximity sensor is the last part we installed, and that's for a reason, just because the flex cable goes on top of all the other ones. Otherwise, I've seen this where some people will have their cables like that, and then they go to reinstall their screen and it doesn't line up, and
Mhm.
it's a whole ordeal. So
So what's the right order?
the right order would be our LCD and digitizer. Those are, you can't mess up the alignment of those. Then the Touch ID, and then the proximity. And they all sit correctly.
So the telltale sign is when you invert the display and you look on the bottom, they kind of all.
Yeah,
sit
they'll kind of want to sit correctly, but the proximity one is the most troublesome. This also technically works with the main flex on top, but it kind of holds together nicer if you have the proximity sensor holding that cable in place.
Okay.
And these FPCs, they are like Legos, so you kind of can feel around until kind of halfway clicks, and then see the rest of it, and you'll hear a little click. And then our backlight. And actually, I did that wrong. You want to plug in the proximity before you plug in Touch ID. Otherwise, it will not sit correctly. Proximity, Touch ID, and all the cables should sit flat. And when you go to put your bracket back on, you should be able to get it to sit properly. So the larger screws, there's going to be two larger screws. The longest one is going to go on the upper right, and the second longest one, it's kind of difficult to tell, but this guy compared to these other ones, it's going to go on the upper left. If this one goes in either of these three, you're not going to have a good time. And if this longest one goes in any of these other ones besides this one, you're going to have a bad time as well.
So if you encounter some resistance when attempting to screw the screw.
Yeah, absolutely. If these don't go in 100% smoothly, just back off and
Check your screws.
check all your screws.
Make sure they're in the right place.
Because then you can have a simple screen replacement turn into serious board damage, and you don't want to have to deal with that. Okay, and that is it. Let's just make sure everything's working here. So I'm going to grab a new battery, and I'll have to adhere this in later, but I'm just going to make sure everything works here.
The Apple logo.
That is always a good sign. And I don't believe we have the passcode for this device, so I'm going to do my best to test the sensors in it. But without the passcode, we're not going to be able to test most functionality of the device.
So one possible way would be to not attach the home button, which would cause assistive touch to come on.
Right. Well, on the 6s, it would actually it doesn't automatically turn on assistive touch. But a good way to tell, and this is how I always tell if Touch ID is working without knowing the passcode.
Okay.
It'll say Touch ID requires your passcode. Otherwise, it will come up with the prompt on the lock screen here. We can just make sure home button's working.
Looks like it
Your
doesn't
touch
like your
works.
fingerprint.
Yeah. The vibrant motors are kind of aggressive on these. Another way that you can test the sensors without knowing the passcode, it also requires you to know the phone's phone number, but you can call the phone, and then you'll be able to test proximity, your speaker, and all that stuff just by having a phone call with the device you're working on. But I don't know the phone number of this phone.
All right.
Awesome.
Where can people go if they need data recovery?
On track.
All right. Thank you.